Looking back at Brian, I smiled gently as I made my way to the shower. "Now it's my turn," I exclaimed. "Please let me freshen up before we crack open the wine and carry on with the evening." I maintained a steady tone, but my avid expectation was obvious. Brian stepped up with a glass of wine in his hand and presented it to me as I made my way back to the living room from the bathroom. I know this is going to be an unforgettable evening because his gaze met mine. His voice was quiet but resolute. He was about to continue speaking when I leaned forward. "Hi there. Are you still present?" All I was doing was describing what had transpired. If you want to know how everything came to pass, I'll tell you from the very beginning. Every aspect of life is divided into the before and after by certain moments. One of such times occurred that night. Both my heart and my emotions are still in a twisted mess. Reason being, it all started with an order that was left behind and a coffee packet that was forgotten. Still, it's too much to bear to explain how it went on, much less muster the guts to tell it now. Please wait to pass judgment until you've heard everything. Because what began that night may have been the most passionate and forbidden moment of my life. Who knew that the young delivery guy I had a passing interest in before would have such a profound impact on me? Only because of me did I welcome him inside to dry off after he got wet. Just thinking about spilling the beans about what happened next makes me excited. My age is 38. Lovely, single, and comfortable in my own skin after years of living alone. Now that I'm older, most of my pals have families of my own. On the other hand, I've been ending each night on my own. Feelings of loneliness are peculiar. On occasion, it's a liberating sensation, but on other occasions, it's a profound void. I thought I was swallowed whole by that void for quite some time. I went to the market that day while still dressed for my workout. After I got out of the gym, sweat clung to my shirt, and my leggings clung to my curves like a glove. Still, I found myself admiring my reflection in the mirror. Whenever I felt the gaze of people upon me, it served as a constant reminder of my identity. At the entrance to the market that day, though, I caught a glance. Something was off. Without any hint of timidity, he paused, his gaze fixed on me. He seemed interested in getting to know me. I forced a small smile onto my lips, but it quickly faded. No need to be silly, I told myself, and kept on shopping. After returning home and setting the shopping bags on the kitchen counter, it hit me. I'd completely forgotten to bring my coffee. I was deeply irritated. For me, coffee was more than simply a beverage. It became nearly ritualistic. To be honest, I didn't feel like returning to the market. I curled up on my couch and stared aimlessly for a little. I leaned down and gently massaged my legs with my hands. This was how living alone felt. It was your responsibility to fill in the gaps when something was missing. My phone rang right as I was thinking about that. A member of the market staff was involved. "Aside from your coffee, Chloe, you neglected to bring a few other items. They mentioned that our delivery guy will be available to send them after his shift." I paused for a second before giving them my address. "Around 8 o'clock, they said, he'll be there." The fact that it sounded so easy made me feel better, so I hung up. The gentle patter of rain on the roof was accompanied by the pressing of dusk darkness against the windows as the doorbell sounded at precisely 8 p.m. There was a tiny pause in my stride as I approached the entrance. I was curious about the person who may be standing behind the door, but for some reason I felt a surge of excitement. When I opened the door, he was standing there. I looked over at the young man, who was drenched to the skin, clutching a suitcase. In an instant, I recalled the lingering gaze from the entrance of the market. "Hello, Brian." His name was that. I retrieved it from the bag's little label. Those eyes, though? I was taken aback by the expression on their faces. Time seemed to stand still at that very second. "You're absolutely drenched," I said, my voice noticeably lower than normal. "Please come inside. I can't abandon you in this state." Just a little moment of hesitation passed before Brian nodded and went inside. His damp clothing soaked the carpet. His small waist and strong shoulders were emphasized by the way his uniform adhered to his body. I glanced across at him out of the blue, but I averted my gaze immediately. I uttered the words, "Let me get you a towel," without noticing the quiver in my voice. There was a noticeable change. There was an underlying sense in me that this night would be anything but a routine delivery. If you're new here and would like to hear more confessions like this, subscribe to my channel and enable notifications. Put your faith in me and listen closely. I guarantee you this will be an absolutely riveting tale. While he was using the towel to dry his face, I realized that Brian was closely observing me. There was more to it than just a passing glance. It was as if he had never laid eyes on a lady before, perhaps even genuinely recognizing one. At that same second, I felt an urge to repress something well up inside of me. Mixed emotions, including loneliness and curiosity, and perhaps more. I was acutely aware that this night had already transcended its status as a mere solitary evening. Under his breath, he apologized for the water that had soaked your home. I felt moved by Brian's genuine expression and the warmth in his voice. In an effort to lighten my tone, I responded that I should be the one to apologize. My friend at the market was the one who requested you to do this, and you continued to come out here long after your shift ended, all because of me. Not just that, but you're absolutely wet. Brian nodded slightly and responded, "No, Miss Chloe," as his name slipped from his lips as a subtle smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. The distance is really quite short because my residence is located nearby. I temporarily forgot about my feelings of isolation as his speech was soothing and reassuring. Even with a little arm lift, he couldn't roll up his shirt sleeves. It was obvious that a towel alone wasn't going to cut it. His muscular arms were so expressive that I couldn't help but watch them move. My best efforts to distract myself were in vain. At last, he spoke up again while cocking his head slightly. "Despite his best efforts, I just don't see this working," he muttered under his breath. "Would it be okay if I used your restroom? Takes more than a towel." I felt a surge of comfort. I saw that I had stared at his dashing face for much too long. Brian had an air of maturity about him, even though he was quite young. His genuine expression was magnified by the fact that his hair, drenched in rain, clung to his forehead. An enthusiasm I hadn't felt in a long time was reawakened by this young man's vitality. "Sure thing," I responded, pointing to the restroom. I will never understand how I kept my voice steady while hiding the inward chaos I was experiencing. "This is a simple right turn." As Brian entered, he tugged on the door handle to close it partially, but it remained slightly ajar. I felt a jolt go through me as I watched his shadow creep inside as steam started to drip out of the crack. The open door continued to let steam float through. Still, I found myself inching closer to the restroom even though I knew it wasn't a good idea. Peering through the narrow opening of the door, I beheld the bathroom's interior reflected in the mirror. In that very instant, he covered his head with his shirt. He took off the damp fabric, which clung to his broad shoulders and exposed the firm lines of his chest. Watching the water drip down his strong body made me gasp for air. His toned frame was an impressive blend of power and elegance, and his physique was immaculate. My heart was racing, and I was attempting to steady myself by resting against the doorframe. Brian undid his pants, leaving him standing naked. His confident manner and steady hand motions captivated me as he proceeded to dry his large shoulders and chest with a towel. It appeared as though time had frozen for an instant. I watched his every action. I felt guilty just thinking about it because it had been a long time since I had laid eyes on a man like this. On the other hand, I couldn't ignore the overwhelming thrill that washed over me. The notion was shattered as Brian's voice interrupted. "Would it be okay if I took a shower?" His tone was cautious but courteous as he inquired. I was frozen in place by the abruptness of his words. My realization of how near I had come to the door startled me. My throat tightened as I hurried to collect my thoughts and find my voice. "Yes, of course," I managed to say, making it sound like the words were emanating from within the room. Taking a quick step back, I made my way to the living room, hoping he hadn't observed me. My inner turmoil and excitement were so palpable that I could not control my quivering legs. The steady spray of water from the shower broke the stillness of the flat as I attempted to collect myself. My feelings of isolation, repressed emotions, and unfulfilled needs all became crystal clear in that instant. The barriers of isolation I had constructed were shattered by Brian's mere presence. Why was I even up here? Just moments before, I had quietly observed a stranger undress through the bathroom door after inviting him into my home and letting him take my shower. I was bewildered and confused. My heart felt like it was going to explode. I gingerly opened my closet door. I retrieved my go-to gym attire, which consists of baggy sweatpants and a t-shirt. They would be a good fit for him was the last thing on my mind. Taking the garments with me, I made my way to the restroom. Carefully setting the garments on the floor, I leaned near the entrance. "Here are some dry clothes for you, Brian," I said. "Feel free to use them," hoping that my voice could conceal my nervousness. His footsteps resounded as he emerged from the restroom a little while later. He was dressed like I was when he got back. I couldn't help but notice his undeniable good looks, especially in his sloppy sweatpants and baggy t-shirt. With a few drops of water still trickling from his newly dried hair, he clutched his damp clothing in his palm. He spoke in an almost embarrassed manner, looking down at his clothing. "Do not let me continue to be an inconvenience to you." He promised to wash them and give them back to him. I offered Brian a cup of herbal tea, and gently explained that I didn't want him to become sick. "I brewed this tea specifically for you. Have a few, please." In my speech I wore a cheerful smile. Our fingers softly touched as Brian retrieved the cup from me. There was an electric charge in that brief contact. I could feel his gaze following my every move as it remained fixed on me. He seemed to be staring at every inch of me as he held to the form-fitting sports top I had on from the gym. I did my best to hide the unusual combination of enthusiasm and anxiety that was building up inside of me. Still staring directly at me, Brian lowered his head ever so slightly in gratitude. "Mr. Chloe, you're quite considerate," he whispered. It touched me because of the warmth it contained. I responded, "Please, just Chloe." In an effort to soften the tone of his opening remarks, we went into the living room and sat down next to each other. He took a drink from his cup, then leaned down and asked, "Are you by yourself?" I looked surprised for an instant before nodding. "No," I whispered. "Where do you stand?" I shrugged. "Brian." He added, with a note of melancholy in his voice, that he too had been alone for some time. I couldn't take my gaze off of his face. He was young, but his eyes betrayed an air of maturity. A narrative. "Brian, what is your age?" With a hint of curiosity I inquired. Brian grinned as he met my gaze. He mentioned 23 and proceeded to add, "Chloe, what about you?" Before responding I paused for a second. 38, bringing my head down a little. I wanted to know his reaction. Brian's brow furrowed and a subtle look of awe spread across his face. "How about 38? "Absolutely not. According to him, I believed you were no older than 30. My face turned red from the sincerity and warmth of his voice. Something profound within me was aroused by his sincere appreciation. My restraint had worn thin. My attention shifted to him and we met eyes. With a weak and quivering voice I started to speak. "Brian, your impact on me is profound. And I have to admit, you look at me as if you're feeling it too." As if he were trying to think of the perfect words but coming up empty, Brian seemed to freeze for a second. Disrupting the stillness, I persisted. I expressed my desire to end this kind of conversation. "You are just too lovely for an isolated woman." I moved in close and kissed him on the lips before I had finished speaking. Despite his initial expression of surprise, he spoke up a few seconds later. There was no longer any distance between us as his kisses warmed mine, and his hands moved gently toward my waist. There was an instantaneous shift from estrangement and bewilderment to intense want, and we were both aware that it was going to happen. With awe and amazement in his gaze, Brian drew back ever so slightly. "It was beyond my wildest dreams," he exclaimed. His heart raced. "I can't believe I'm seeing you. You're the most stunning woman I've ever seen." His words resonated deeply with me, fueling my need even further. With his gaze fixed on me, I rose slowly to my feet. Like he was terrified of missing anything, his hands quivered ever so slightly. In my haste to get to him, I flung my shirt over my head and then let it droop to the floor. As expected, my tights were next. "Does it seem real or like a dream?" I whispered in a playful tone. "Look at it again and make a decision." After that, I leaned back on the couch and progressively reclined, exposing my body while maintaining eye contact with him. Observing the intensity in Brian's eyes just served to heighten my anticipation. Seeing his determination waver only intensified the impact of this moment for me. Brian froze for a moment, his breath quickening. By discarding the slack garments that belonged to me, he entirely liberated himself. I was captivated by his unwavering resolve and intense longing. He drew nearer, and his powerful hands caressed my knees. He had a soft yet forceful touch, In a low, raspy voice, he spoke to you. You're utterly captivating. You're stunning. His gentle caress radiated warmth as it worked its way across my entire being. Now Brian was crouching down by my side, pressing his face against mine as we sat on the couch. No more hesitance was felt as our lips connected once more. I was able to let go of my pent-up emotions and loneliness as he hugged me. In that instant, our proximity made us feel whole. Some tremendous force was at work within me. I think I made a noise that sounded like the ocean when I shut my eyes. The awe-inspiring beauty and electric energy of the moment caused my legs to quiver shortly thereafter. Upon waking up, I cast my gaze upwards at the ceiling before turning to Brian. I clutched the covers tightly as I stared into his eyes and felt his sweaty hair. "Brian, you're spending the night with me," was my exact words at that precise moment. "I will not allow you to leave my side," I further stated. Brian interrupted me. "I wouldn't leave this beauty and go anywhere, Chloe," as he was clearly breathless. I was already pumped up, but for a second the whole day seemed to flash before my eyes. My already intense sense of euphoria was amplified by the sheer peculiarity of my actions. "Brian," I was shaking from head to toe as I thanked you for bringing my coffee. Brian merely grinned and remained silent. His eyes beamed with love and adoration as he observed me. I had already come to terms with the fact that I was experiencing an unprecedented moment. And at the same moment that I was thinking this, Brian too let himself go totally. It had all transpired in an instant and with such force. Inside, I felt a comforting warmth. Brian, who was still gasping for air, got to his feet before the warmth's effects wore off. I turned to Brian and whispered, "Now it's my turn," as I made my way to the shower. "I should probably shower and change clothes before we crack open the wine and keep the party going." I spoke with a steady tone, yet my enthusiasm was contagious. Brian nodded. His lips contorted into that peculiar expression of self-assurance. "I will be patiently waiting for you," he whispered with subtle but profound meaning. I rested my head on the wall as I entered the shower and felt the hot water on my skin. It was as if the water erased all evidence of Brian's touch, but the warmth he left behind remained in my memory, real and vivid. An electric current ran through my entire being. I couldn't help but think about how I had opened my home to a stranger, a courier, and even let him use my shower. Now here he was waiting for me in my living room. I hadn't felt this energized in years, yet everything that had transpired gave it to me. As the water in the shower was turned off, I hurriedly brushed my fingers through my hair. Immediately after grabbing a towel, I set out to dry off, looking forward to going back. He was my only option for the rest of the evening. I ran into the living room as soon as I got out of the shower. The first thing I saw caused me to stop and take stock. While I was at the table, Brian stood by with a bottle of wine and 2 glasses, ready to greet me. He had turned down the illumination and set out some candles. Sitting on the couch, his large bulk seemed at ease, and he glanced at me with the same self-assured smile that had been on his face before. "Brian, you're really unique," I whispered to myself while embracing myself, a subtle smile playing on my lips. Once again, I was enchanted by his meticulous planning, kind actions, and extraordinary charisma. I was approached by Brian, who rose to his feet and reached for one of the glasses. Together, we were going to make this night one to remember, he assured me as our gazes met. Firm yet low in pitch, he spoke. I could feel a transformation taking place within me as I sipped the wine. The phrase loneliness had taken on a whole new meaning. The significance of the moment was transformed by his mere presence. This was just the beginning of the night. We both sensed that there was still a great deal more to come. "I can tell this narrative has had a profound effect on you because you've come this far. Don't miss a thing since there's a lot more to tell. Please consider following this story, enabling notifications, and leaving a comment.